Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this virtual session on alternative assessment methods. My name is Katie Linder, and I'm the Executive Director for Program Development with Global Campus. And today I'm joined by several colleagues to provide information for you. Brian Niehoff, the Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness, Dawn Saucier, the Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and my colleague at Global Campus, Laura Widener, who's one of our instructional designers. On today's session, I'm going to be dropping some resources and links into the chat box throughout the session. These resources and links are going to be included on the Keep Teaching website with the recording of this session. So if you want to view anything later, you can always go there and see those resources. And that video should be posted within the next 24 hours or so. We also do have a second session with the exact same information happening on Thursday. So if you want to have any colleagues attend this and see the exact same information, you're welcome to have them join us later in the week. So let's go ahead and get started. Laura, if you want to advance the slides. Our agenda for today is a little bit of context setting, and then we're going to share a little bit about our current state of online proctoring. We'll talk about some alternative assessments to proctored exams. We'll talk a little bit about some best practices for offering exams online and how to utilize Zoom for test monitoring. And we'll also talk a little bit about the Respondus tool. There will be plenty of time at the end for questions, and I will be collecting those questions in the chat box. So if you don't mind posting your questions there, that will also help us to create a frequently asked questions guide that we can post with the video once the recording is available. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to my colleague Brian, and he's going to start us off with some context setting. And Brian, you're going to have to go ahead, Brian Niehoff, because I see more than one Brian in here. I don't see a mic connected for you, Brian. So you'll want to make sure that that's turned on. We'll give Brian just a moment to connect his microphone. All right, for folks just joining us, we're just waiting on a quick, looks like technical difficulty here as we get one of our presenters hooked up for audio. Thank you for your patience.
Am I in?
You are in. Welcome, Brian. Go ahead.
I didn't realize that I didn't have my mic on. Sorry, I missed the introduction.
No problem. Well, you're here now, and I'm going to turn things over to you for context setting.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. So we are in as everybody knows, we are in a very unprecedented crisis here with the university. This is something we've never, ever experienced before. And so it creates a lot of issues for us. And we have absolute great admiration for everything you guys have done. You faculty members have done some wonderful, wonderful shifts in their classes. They've really made a great effort to put everything online, put everything remote. And that's been an amazing effort over the past month. And we do appreciate all that. Everybody faces personal challenges. We recognize that not only you as faculty are facing personal challenges teaching from your homes, but also teaching with kids or dogs or however else you got, whatever else you got going on. There's a lot of things that are happening in your lives. And the students are no different. The students have the same challenges as well. Some of them may be back home working at their parents' house. Their parents may have expectations of them there. They may have to watch younger brothers and sisters, take care of pets. Or they may have kids of their own, and so their challenges are equally as there. And they may also have a lot of challenges with technology. So as we thought about getting people prepared for this, last part of the semester, the provost has some principles in all of this, and that was when we made all these decisions to make changes, we decided number one, we're not going to increase costs for students. Students have paid their tuition, students have paid in what they've needed to pay, so we can't increase their costs, and we're not going to. And then also we want to try to be as fair and equitable for students as we can. So fairness and equity is the other piece of all this. So as we go to where are we with online proctoring, this was an option that we thought might be a possibility when we first made this shift. We weren't real high on it because we knew that there was going to be some challenges there as well. But I know that there probably are some faculty members that have been holding out for this. And to be honest, our current vendor is Examity, and our own experience with them is that they experienced their own problems throughout the COVID crisis. They had to shut themselves down for a while. And because of all the changes they've had to make, they don't offer live proctoring at this point in time. So there's not a human being proctoring students as there might have been in the past. So their live proctoring is not available. They have an AI proctoring solution that exists, but to be honest, it's not really functional at scale. What it is it's a system in which people are monitoring. People are looking at the AI is monitoring a student for suspicious behavior. That gets flagged. Somebody might look at it later on. And to be honest, also the issues with faculty and student support have not shown to be very consistent. So we do have some challenges with this particular vendor. Other vendor companies exist out there, but their costs are high. And as we said, we don't have, we're not going to put the cost onto the students. And a lot of them are also receiving a lot of requests around the country. So the other proctoring options everybody's backed up. Everybody's trying to do the same type of things. The challenge with other proctoring solutions is that the costs are kind of high. They're higher than we want. We can't pass that on to the students. I don't know if departments and deans would want to take on these kinds of costs, but to be honest, so to be honest, online proctoring is just a big challenge at this point in time. And we want to say that it's really not an option. I think that one of the things we want to try to do with today's session is get the point across that there are plenty of other ways in which student learning can be assessed. Having a proctored exam using our proctoring partner is not going to work at this point in time for the remainder of the semester. It's just a challenge for us, and it's one of those things that we can't really do much about. But we also know that student learning can be assessed in many, many ways, and I think Dr. Saucier is in line to talk about that.
So to start out, can everybody hear me?
We can. Go ahead, Don.
Okay, excellent. My name is Don Saucier. I'm the Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center. And one of the things we immediately kind of thought about when we were thinking of how to assess our students' learning is we can get around the issues with proctored exams if we don't have proctored exams. So we put our heads together, we looked at the resources out there, and we decided there are probably some ways that many classes, not all, but many classes can try to get students to demonstrate their learning in ways that are going to be a little bit more realistic and circumvent some of the issues of online proctoring. For instance, myself personally, I have exams in my classes, or at least I did until the COVID-19 global pandemic. And I couldn't find a situation that really worked for me and worked for the situation that I thought my students would be in to have them take normal timed proctored exams. So I decided to do other things. And some of the things that I've decided to do will be on our list, because what we tried to do was to brainstorm some ideas that you can consider. And if these don't work for you, that's fine. This is not an exhaustive list. This is not something that if it's going to work for you, we're going to mandate or compel. But there are other ways that students can demonstrate their learning and that we can assess their learning besides exams. So one of the first ones that we came up with, and we like this one, is to ask students to share their knowledge of course content with an audience different than the instructor. One of the things that I prioritize in my classes is communication, my students' ability to both in oral and written forms communicate their knowledge to other people. So maybe it's telling your grandparents about it at Thanksgiving. Maybe it's writing an op-ed piece for a newspaper. Maybe it's writing a blog. Maybe it's writing recommendations for a school system or something like that. But thinking about how it is that you can take that information and write it for somebody else. And if you can do a good job with that, we can probably assess that the students have shown some learning and demonstrated some learning in that. The second one that we came up with, and I like this one and I used this one, is to ask students to write their own exam questions and then respond. The second exam in my advanced social psychology class is actually due today at midnight. And what those students are doing are writing 10 exam questions that they will then answer by midnight tonight. And they're going to be graded on the depth of their questions overall, the breadth of the questions overall in terms of the coverage of the material. They have 250 words per question to answer their own questions. I have things like one of the questions can be what I call a fair but unanswerable question. So they can ask the question and then not answer the question, but tell me why it'd be really hard to answer. And then one item they can designate as creative and fun. There has to be some product, some creative product that can demonstrate their learning to whatever question they ask there. And I think that as we start to do this and have them start to think like we would in assessing it, we have these really creative ways that we can have our students demonstrate their learning. Another one, and very forward thinking, and these are getting at the higher levels of learning, that critical thinking, that creation, that evaluation, that comparison, more so than just the demonstration of definitional knowledge. You can ask students to write a guide to success in the course for future students. So if students are going to take this course in the future, what would they recommend? What would they have students do? What would they have them do to prepare them for assignments, for exams if they were going to be traditional, for some modified version of exams, to basically work backwards from the student learning outcomes to the achievement of those. Because all of the things that we're recommending are going to be backward engineered from what you want your students to learn, and then you're teaching to those and having the assignments be demonstrations of the knowledge that were a result of your teaching. So again, this is not a comprehensive list, and we have a couple more as well. The next thing we can do is we can ask students to create an assignment that would be a capstone for their learning. This is something that I do in my Principles of College teaching class, where, and we did this before the pandemic, we said at the end of the year, we're going to have an end of the semester project in lieu of a final exam, where you're going to create an assignment that shows us how much you've learned. And you create that assignment, you give us the assignment parameters, you give us the rubric, and then you complete it. So you go through all of those phases about thinking about what's important in the class, what would you have to do to demonstrate learning in the class, you create all the dimensions of that rubric, and then you actually do it. And then we actually have a debriefing portion where we say, how would you do it differently? Because I don't know about all of you, I'm never perfect the first time I do something, is how would you change that assignment if you were to actually give it to students in your class the next semester? One of the other things that I think it's important for some of us, if your content allows for it, to lean into is the current events that are happening around us. I know that students in a social psychology class are really wondering about how it is that they can apply the learning about aggression and prejudice and helping behavior and attraction and research methods and all of that to the pandemic we're going through. So you can have assignments that allow them to do that. In my social psych class, we have a COVID-19 mission where they basically look at the things that are happening around them and suggest, is our society becoming more pro-social or more antisocial? And they apply the theories of social psychology, they apply the research methods and evaluating data in that assignment. So they can actually do something relevant and valuable and personally interesting what they're doing now. And the last option we have, and again, this is not a comprehensive list, there's lots of other things we can consider and think about, is to ask students to demonstrate their learning in ways that leverage virtual communication. So how is it that they can use the various tools that we have to connect each other virtually? How can we use asynchronous video sharing? How can we use Zoom for more synchronous communications? How can we get students together to work in a peer review, for instance, either synchronously or asynchronously, to further their learning, but also to demonstrate it so we can assess it. Now, as I offered at the beginning, this may not work in your class, and there may be other creative things that you can consider, but avoiding exams is one way to avoid the problems that we have right now with administering exams.
Okay, now my turn. So we do want to try and find alternative assignments for faculty or for students. But in that process, we also need to think about those faculty that do need to offer exams, right? Some of you really have content that you feel needs to be demonstrated as an exam. So I want to talk a little bit about the settings you want to consider in creating that in a Canvas setting. So hold on just a second, I was gonna do something here. It's not letting me turn my camera on. I wanted to show myself, but it's being stubborn. Okay, so putting exams in Canvas. We want to carefully consider the quiz settings for our exams because there are ways that you can set it in Canvas where students have more access than you really want them to. So specifically, we want to think about disabling their ability to see the exam results until after everyone has completed the exam. Now you can set a time limit for your exam, and I encourage you to consider that 50-minute time period that we usually have for on-campus exams with a little bit of wiggle room. Also consider some flexibility in the time range that you offer the exam. There's certainly an argument for everyone taking the exam at exactly the same time, but there are also a lot of things that our students are going through right now, and they may not be available at that 10 o'clock time slot that your class was offered on campus. So we need to think about how we can have a little bit of flexibility within that time period that students are supposed to be taking the exam. So you might offer 60 minutes instead of 50, so that if they get in there a minute or two late, then they have the ability to complete the exam. In Canvas, you have 3 dates with each of your assignments, quizzes as well. You have the starting date, right, that they cannot access it until that date and time. You have the due date, and then you have the until date. If you fill in the until date and time, students are cut off at that until date and time. They do not have an opportunity to have the full exam time in that time space. So if they happen to have to start the exam at 30 minutes before that until date, they do get cut off at 30 minutes rather than having the 50 or 60 minutes that you wanted them to have available. Now, one thing you consider using as well is the moderate this quiz function. Our folks in chemistry have used this recently to offer an exam to over 200 students, actually, excuse me, over 600 students taking their exam. And moderate this quiz in Canvas kind of shows you when students start and how long it takes them to take the exam and sort of their progress through that content. And I know the instructor dealing with that exam actually was able to get in there, you know, a few minutes after the exam started and check in with several students, send them a reminder that they needed to take the exam right then. So that was really helpful for them to manage that very large group of students taking the exam. One thing we'd like you to also consider is emphasizing the commitment to the K-State Honor and Integrity System. We know that a lot of people are worried about not handling these exams with the best of intentions. But one of the things that's really critical for us to focus on is that, one, we are explaining very explicitly what honor and integrity with your exam means. If it is not an open book, open notes, open resource exam, you need to explicitly tell your students that is the case. Of course, if they were coming into your classroom, you would tell them to put their books away, right? But online, you need to state that in your instructions, that what it means for your exam to follow the rules of proctoring. They may not have the same interpretation and the same understanding of what it means in this online environment. Many faculty will choose to use the K-State Honor Pledge as the first question in their exam. And you can make that a 0-point question, but they need to acknowledge that statement. On my honor as a student, I have neither given nor received unauthorized aid on this academic work. And they have to click yes. So that can be just that reminder to students. It can be that anyone on the fence of possibly doing something that you might consider a violation of that honor pledge, kind of pull them back. But more than anything, we want you to really think about trusting your students, because K-State has prided itself on a system of trust, and we do not have a lot of things in place right now that emphasize the cheating side, and we are emphasizing instead that K-State students should be living by this honor and integrity system. We do recognize that some people are looking for an option to be able to set up some sort of proctoring for their students. And Dr. Brian Linshield in Food, Nutrition, Dietetics, and Health has come up with a system in which he provides, or he has each of his students sort of copy the proctoring environment that they would have had if they were in an examity proctoring situation. So we're going to provide you a link to a recording of Brian demonstrating this, and then also his instructions, which he's graciously provided to everyone, that you would provide to students, and then also you can modify them so it fits your environment. Essentially what those students do is they will start a Zoom session and record just themselves taking the exam. And we would recommend that you do sort of a practice quiz for them to kind of test that out when they're not in the high pressure environment of the exam itself. And once they have all taken the exam, then the instructor can go back and kind of review those recordings. But essentially what they'd be doing is just recording themselves, looking around, completing the exam. You would not see the exam itself, just the environment around them. So they couldn't be talking to another person or that kind of thing. But please review those resources that Brian has provided to us to consider that as an option. Another way that you might consider using Zoom to create a proctoring environment would be to have a Zoom session that all of your students join. You would have your students turn off their microphone but leave their camera on, and essentially you would be their proctor, just watching over them to make sure that they aren't doing anything that would cause you to be concerned that they aren't paying attention to the exam, that they aren't looking off to the side or using their phone or anything like that. You will see the student and monitor their behavior, but you would not see the exam or their screen necessarily. It could be that you bring in some other faculty to kind of be co-hosts during that time and monitor smaller groups of students in that process. Of course, you would want to use the best practices for Zoom meetings so that we don't have any of the issues of Zoom bombing that we've all heard about. Part of the concerns, though, that we do have with Zoom or with any proctoring situation is equity. Some of our students still lack access to strong internet and or web cameras, and so this would not be a possible option for them in this environment. So you would need to consider how you could make exceptions for these students if this were a choice that you made. One more thing we wanted to make you aware of is the Respondus Lockdown browser. You can learn more by contacting the IT Help Desk. It does have some limitations because while it locks down the student's computer so that they cannot navigate away from the exam itself, there are issues with any students that use screen readers. It is not a fully accessible tool. And it doesn't necessarily stop them from using another device. It simply limits their ability to use that computer screen. But another feature of the Respondus suite of offerings is called Respondus 4.0. And it is a tool that can help you actually convert your Word document paper exams into a Canvas exam. So you're not having to create each question. You can receive help on doing that through the Keep Teaching website. There are appointments available to talk with someone to help you convert your exams, so that can save you a little bit of time in converting it into a Canvas resource. So that's all we had for right now. So we want to open it up for questions.
All right, thanks, Laura. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, Dawn. We have had some questions come in through the chat, so I want to go ahead and tackle those first, and then we can go ahead and shift into other questions that people might have. Please do feel free to drop these into the chat. So the first question we had was, are there other vendors as alternatives to Examity? And as Brian mentioned, we are not pursuing other proctoring vendors at this time for a range of reasons that he gave at the beginning of the virtual session. We also had the question of what is Global Campus using for online proctoring? And Global Campus is currently using Examity, which is how we are aware of the current support challenges that we're having with that vendor. And that was something that we were pretty concerned about. We don't want to have faculty and students go into a situation with a vendor where we know that they can't provide the support that we would like them to provide. And there were some other challenges there as well about scaling some of the exams. We also had a question, I think, that was maybe before we had provided the online exam information, saying that we're not doing exams because we assume they will cheat. What ensures they won't do so on the alternative assignments? We are offering exams as an option, for sure. It's just that we cannot offer a proctoring vendor at this time. So we are hoping that there are a range of options here for you to consider in terms of helping students to think through how they can provide evidence of their learning in a lot of different alternative ways. And then we also had a question about what if students do not have a webcam during the Zoom proctored exam. And we had a couple responses to that. Brian shared in the chat that they can share their screen so that you can see what they're doing taking their exam. And also we are aware that this is kind of an equity issue with some of our students. We also have students that don't necessarily have internet. So we are needing to think through some creative alternatives for those various students. Okay, so go ahead and offer any other questions in the chat here. I see a note from Nora. I'm afraid that the options provided do not seem to quite address the problem, at least for me, a large class at the graduate level. We are aware that there might be some disappointment here, especially around the proctoring issue. And this was something that we have been exploring for the past several weeks to try to see if there was a way that we could make this work. And unfortunately, for right now, this is not going to be an option for our current classes. So it's something we will continue to look into and try to find a solution. And we are here and ready to help you find other alternatives. And I know Don Saucier has offered his time and attention to working with faculty individually to try to figure out different ways that they can assess student learning in meaningful ways, as has Laura Widener, our instructional designer with Global Campus.
Thank you, Katie. This is Nora. I wonder, can I speak, please?
Go ahead.
So I do have some serious concerns about this. I mean, particularly in my case, I have a large class, a graduate level class. I need depth. I need to be able to evaluate depth on an individual basis in a way that is manageable, right? In a way that I can handle. I'm only one person. So exams is the way that I've done that traditionally as a compromise. In addition, of course, I already have assignments, I already have a number of other things to check, but to be able to assess individual learning, I find I just don't see an option to exams at that level. And I wonder, is there a possibility to just give incompletes to students across the board and take final exams whenever we lift this quarantine and we can meet in person to actually have an exam, an on-person exam?
Nora, this is Brian, and that's not really a good option for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of students who are going to be graduating. You're going to be dragging things into the next semester, and that's really something the provost has said no about. So I mean, I've taught graduate classes for many years. How large a class are you talking about?
I have 45 students, Brian, graduate level students taking statistics, regression, and analysis of variance. I can't ask them each to write their own exams. I'm never going to finish grading that.
I know that. I mean, I used to give. I had classes about that size for graduate classes back when, and giving essay exams, giving them, thinking about it in a different way, take-home exams. Those are ways in which you can actually explore a lot of deeper questions if you give them take-home open book tests, explore this and have them analyze things. And I realize the grading is different on that. It's just, so it's a different level for you, but it's doable. It's just a matter of what expectations can you have for them at this particular class without giving them an exam. I think there's some options.
So I have done take-home exams in smaller classrooms, in smaller classes, and for smaller classes that works out okay. Again, it's the size of the class and the depth of the material that I need to evaluate. That I just don't see.
Why wouldn't it apply to the larger class, a 45 student class?
Because it takes forever to grade, Brian, and then I have no guarantee that students are not talking to each other. I mean, in a smaller class, it's easier to follow and see who's who, and and get to know them and see what their thought process is and where they are at. And in a large class, you just have no, particularly online as it's been. I mean, I've been working with the students for half a semester. I cannot claim that I have gotten to know all of them in half a semester, and through the online setting, it's even worse, right? I mean, I have a good chunk of my students that don't even have high-speed internet, so they aren't even coming to the live sessions, to the live lectures. They are trying to access them on recordings, so I have no direct connection to them. It's just,
This is Don Saucier. One of the things that I would invite you to consider, and this is something that I've had to consider too. I also teach large classes, not so many this semester, but I've had classes of 200 and 300 students. I always, when I'm having them do any type of assignment, I have a maximum on what I want them to do, not a minimum. So like I said, in the exams that I'm having my students do this semester, for each answer that they provide, there's a maximum of 250 words that they can provide. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to keep it manageable. There's also only 10 questions. So one of the things that I've had to do is to streamline and prioritize the information in a way that makes it manageable for them and for me. And it may not work for you, but if you're going to do something take home, I think keeping the number of items small and the depth high, but also a maximum on the word count or the page limit or something like that, so that they really have to streamline their thinking and to demonstrate their learning effectively, efficiently, and hopefully excellently, might be something you can kind of consider, because the take-home exams I take as a grad student were never ending. The take-home exams that I give do have a very definitive end, and that has made it a lot more manageable for me.
Nora, I also see that Brian Lynchield has offered in the chat to check out the Zoom exam monitoring. We did drop a
Okay.
document in there to see if that would be a possibility. I am going to go ahead and move on, Nora, to another question, but I want to encourage
Okay,
you to
thank
continue
you.
talking with Dawn and Laura and others to brainstorm to see what we can do here.
Thank you.
We do have a question from Kevin about math exams and any ideas that we have for those. And I'm wondering if one of our panelists today wants to respond to that.
This is Don again. I can take a shot a little bit at that. I haven't taught math, but I've taught quantitative research methods where students have to apply analysis of variance and regression techniques and those kinds of things. One of the things that I'll often have them do is to write about how to do something. And I find that if I'm pitching it toward teach an undergraduate in a 200 level class how to do this, or tell me the 5 things that you would cover if you were writing a lecture to teach analysis of variance to your students, or the 3 biggest pitfalls of doing a regression analysis, or the 10 recommendations you would give for ethical research. I get my students to think critically about that. Now, one of the questions I saw earlier was things about cheating. It's going to be pretty clear to me if people are giving me the exact same things because these aren't exactly the things that I've taught them. I also think it's important, as Katie said, to trust our students and to also let them know, and I think Laura said this too, to let them know what does and does not constitute cheating. I'll tell my students they can use all of their book, all of their notes, they can talk to me, but they can't talk to each other. I don't know for sure that they believe me on that, but the research shows that a lot of people engage in academic dishonesty are because they didn't know the rules that they were allowed to play by for that assignment or that exam. So I think focusing more on the process and explaining that process might be a way to go, but I'm not a math professor.
And Kevin, I would also say that you could use the Zoom exam monitoring just as easily. I think that Brian pointed that out. It would be there. Another option, I know that the math department here has been, they're switching all their classes over as well. And you may talk with, if you have any friends over in the math department, or I would encourage you to talk to Andy Bennett, the department head, and I'm sure they can give you a lot of avenues for how they have made this shift.
For folks who are here and who are interested in some resources on writing effective exam questions, I noticed we had a note in the chat from Julia that multiple choice online can be written, so it can be very challenging. We can provide some of those resources and link them with this video recording in case that's something that folks are concerned about and they want to think about how to write more effective questions. And yes, Nora, I can go ahead and share that link again. Laura, did you want to add anything about this question on math exams?
I did. More about the concern about, cheating or looking at other alternative resources, talking with each other during an exam. The reality is, in a 50-minute window, 60-minute window, or if you're doing the final exam, 2 hours, they don't have a lot of time to consider the questions, go talk to someone else, and complete the exam. One of our colleagues here shared some fantastic statistics with me about the results of her most recent exam. She teaches both online and on campus, and her on-campus first exam was a closed book exam. So she teaches the same course online and on campus. Her on-campus students got an 84% on that exam. Her online students who had open book, open resources, had a 74% on that exam. So they didn't do better than in that closed book environment. Often those students will get distracted and not be able to work through the materials. So if anything, if you've converted your exam from closed book to open book, stress to your students that they still need to study just as intently. They still need to work and prepare just as much as they did before. Just having the resource sitting beside them is not going to make it easier to complete the exam. So switching also, for now both of her classes are online. Both sections did exactly the same in the second exam that was both online. So there really was not any misunderstanding. She does that process of having the honor and integrity statement be her first question. She very clearly explains what is cheating on her exam, and both the on-campus students and the online students performed exactly same percentage on this second exam. So there really is the parameters that you can set up within your Canvas exam really can help the students be successful and follow the rules that you need them to.
Thanks so much, Laura. Are there other questions that people have about alternative assessment methods?
Hello, this is Lena Chakrabarty. Can I ask a question?
Yes, please go ahead, Lena.
If we have some of our students, we work with international students who are, and we assess their English proficiency. And if we set up a test where we are using the Zoom cameras or we are finding some way to monitor them visually. If there are some students who either do not have webcams or don't have a phone where they can take a picture of themselves or a video of themselves, if they either don't have them or they cite religious reasons as to why they do not want to be observed as they take their test, can we still go ahead and use Zoom for the ones who are willing or able to do it? And if that's the case, how do we decide which is a valid test and which is not? What I'm saying is, do we have to have buy-in or capability from every student to be able to do something like that?
It's a great question, Lena. Thanks.
So have you had experiences with students who don't want to use their phone even?
Well, what we have had is we have had some students who either do not have webcams, they have a functioning laptop, or they're using their smartphones to join class. We have students who have gone back home, so they're in different time zones all around the world. And then we do have some, for example, Saudi female students who might not want to, who do not turn on their cameras when they're in class, and there has already been one person who does not want to show herself or doesn't want to somebody to be recording her while she's taking exams. And so the question is, can we still go ahead and use this? I mean, this is their privacy. Do they have a choice, or we say, no, you have to do it or you can't take the exam? Or do we just say, okay, if you can do it, if you can't, don't do it? And then what's the standard we are setting up?
That's a really good question. I'm just off the top of my head. I think you could go ahead with the Zoom for the students who do. I mean, what would be option B for a student who didn't want to be? I mean, you could do lockdown browser for everybody. You could do, it does create an equity issue, though. It does create a problem. And I don't know if you have had that problem or if you expect that to be a problem.
We have had students voice that concern already. In a class
in which somebody is supposed to be speaking English as part of the exam, I think that they have to offer some way in which they can demonstrate to you that they're doing what you want them to do.
Lena, I would also, sorry,
yes,
go ahead.
No, please.
I would also consider treating this similarly to how we would an accommodation issue, where we work with individual students to try to provide a situation of equity as best we can based on some of the constraints or parameters that we're working within. And we know that sometimes equity does not always equal one-to-one translation of, it's not going to be exactly the same thing, but we are trying to create a situation in which we are assessing student learning in a way that we feel comfortable with and that they feel comfortable with. So I think that this is a situation, and we can kind of double check on this with other folks. We may not be able to answer every single question that we get today, in the moment, but I think this would be a situation where you could have a kind of policy of how you plan to run the exam. And then if students feel uncomfortable for whatever reason, religious reasons or otherwise, you could work with them one-on-one to try to see if there was an accommodation. But I think that part of this issue is we are all clearly experiencing things that we weren't intending to experience. We didn't necessarily know that some of these issues were going to come up. And so we are going to have to kind of troubleshoot them as best we can. And sometimes that will mean a one-to-one engagement with students to try to figure out, okay, what is the exact issue that's happening here? And how can I, help this student to offer me meaningful evidence of their learning in an environment that I feel like I can trust, the fidelity of that environment. And it may mean some different options for different students to make sure that we can do that.
I think Natalie raises a good point. Is it the recording of their voice or themselves, or is it just being seen at all? And I think Natalie may have something to say about this, working with the Student Access Center.
I think being seen is one of the aspects. A lot of them do not show themselves in class because, they don't. But in class, when they are in class together, face to face, they obviously see each other.
Well,
but I think the recording is what they are.
Well, that would be, I guess, my response to that is, can we do this in such a way where we can just at least see you doing this and not record? That might be something that can be worked out.
Just with that particular student.
Correct. Yeah. And again,
Right.
It would be kind of a one-on-one accommodation of their concern.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, those are things that we are considering as we are thinking about our exams, the major ones that are standardized across the level.
Thanks for raising that question, Lena. And I do also want to encourage everyone here, if you have kind of a situation like this where you feel like you're kind of in a bit of a pickle and you're not quite sure what to do, we wanted to introduce the resources that we provided in this session, but also encourage you to reach out to one of our instructional designers or to Don Saucier or to other resources that we have on campus that can help you to kind of brainstorm and think creatively about what you might want to do. And again, I think going back to kind of Brian's original statement at the very beginning of our session, this is a really unprecedented situation. So it will require us to be a little bit flexible, to be a little bit creative, and really think about what are kind of the core things that we are wanting to measure in terms of student learning, and what are the best ways in which we can do that. And it may be that some of those ways look a little bit different than what we've done in the past. And we're gonna have to kind of get creative about some of that. So we do appreciate so much the creative solutions that have already come up and some of the things that we talked about today that have come from our faculty in terms of really thinking about how to make this work. I'm gonna go ahead and open it up and see if there's any other questions that folks might have that we can answer this afternoon.
Katie, I might add a comment to your comments there, and that is everyone around the country is experiencing the exact same problem as we are. And we have created, and Katie herself has created this wonderful community on our Keep Teaching website that connects with people around the country. So it wouldn't be, if you can throw questions onto that board, converse with your colleagues elsewhere to see how people are doing things. We're all in this together. That's the only way we're going to get past it all. This is something nobody wanted, nobody would have ever opted for. It presents us with this crazy, crazy situation, opportunity, however you want to approach it. And there are ways to get through it. It's just a matter of you do have to think of things differently. The students, you, yourself, everybody's got some challenges.
As Katie said, we can post several different resources with the recording of this on the Keep Teaching website. And one thing I encourage everybody to consider is the work that Dr. Rush, our Dean for Vet Med, has done on really focusing on asking good questions, making sure that our questions really are getting to the heart of what we want to know from our students. And I think that can help you as well as you think about multiple choice or alternate types of questions. How do we really, really get to what we want students to know about, and how do we measure that in those questions? Are we doing it correctly?
Any other questions that folks want to raise at this time?
I think I'll address what Dr. Donnelly has said here as well. There is a function in Canvas that you can kind of see what your students were doing during the exam, kind of see if they did go away from the exam window. There's no way to know what they were doing during that time, but it can be a way to kind of monitor or let them know that you can see that kind of thing when they're taking their exam. Adding just kind of that vague system of statement, rather, of that the Canvas system is tracking their performance on the exam. That could be good enough. But taking an exam in a different environment is really hard for students. This is stressful. They're not sure about the material. They're not sure how to navigate the exam. So make sure that you're offering some alternative assignment if you do want them to take a final exam, that they've had some sort of practice quiz or smaller quiz, some orientation to the Canvas quizzing environment, so that it's not brand new to them when they go to take that stressful final exam.
Thanks, Laura. Julia has also added a comment in the chat that if you share, there's a penalty in the case that they help others be successful if you are using a curve in terms of your grading. Yeah, one of the key messages is to be really explicit with students. One of the things we know from the research and literature on online cheating in specific is that oftentimes it is happening because students really don't know that it's cheating. They're doing something that they kind of common sense thought it was okay, or in another class it was okay, but in this class it's not okay, but no one told them. And so this was something I heard from a faculty member I talked with this week, that they said, they hadn't said open book was okay, but a lot of their students had open book exams in other courses. And so they just kind of assumed that that was kind of the typical practice. And so being really explicit with your students about what counts as cheating in your mind and what you're hoping they will or will not do during an exam or during an assignment, that's a really important thing as we've transitioned into this remote modality. Okay, so we're getting to the end of our time together this afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and just open it up one more time to see if there's any additional questions or comments that folks want to add into the chat. And I'll also offer a reminder that we did record today's session. We will be posting it on the Keep Teaching website in case there's anything you want to revisit, along with all of the links and resources that were mentioned in today's session.